we're about to talk about identity, and my next guest says to be Native in America is to live in a world of contradictions. The number of Americans who claim Native identity has increased 85% in the last 10 years, but the number of people formally enrolled in tribes has not. Carrie Lowry Schuettpelz is the author of the Indian Card, Who Gets to Be Native in America, and Carrie is speaking tonight at the Elliott Bay Book Company. But first, she's here on our couch. Welcome to New Day.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes. So before we talk about the book, I kind of want to talk about a little bit about where you worked before and yourself and why you wanted to write this book.
Sure. So, my first background was in policy. I went to school for public policy and spent a long time working in that field. I worked in the Obama administration and, dabbled a little bit in Native policy.
Yeah.
And then I went back to school to get an MFA in creative writing, and I realized maybe it's writing I want to do. And so this book was a really fun way to sort of put those two things together, to align two things that I cared a lot about and had spent a lot of time working on.
That's incredible. What an amazing story. And I'm so happy that this is your first book, right?
It is, yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you talk about this early on in the book, tribal enrollment. For someone that hasn't heard about that, how do you describe that?
The process is sort of like when you live in the US and you go to get your driver's license or you apply for a passport. It's one of those processes that says I'm an official member of a group. And so tribal enrollment is a person is able to go into a tribe or a Native Nations office, apply for their tribal enrollment card using historical documents, genealogical documents, and then the tribe is able to say, okay, yes, you should get a card. And so particularly for federally recognized tribes, it's a card that carries a lot of weight. It means that you are a member, a citizen of a Native nation. In a lot of ways, it's a political identity just as much as any other sort of identity. But it's also the kind of thing that not every Native person qualifies for or understands the process of or, wants to go get. And so it became this interesting sort of thing that I was curious about. Where did it come from? Why do we do it? And how do people feel about it? And so that was kind of one of the projects of the book, was researching a little bit more about where did this come from.
Yeah, and the book, you don't go in too much about your own experience, but you interview a lot of people. Why was that choice made there?
I have my own experience of Native identity. I'm an enrolled member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. I have a card.
Do you carry that around?
I carry it in my wallet,
okay.
And part of the project was that I pulled out the card and I thought, where did this come from? Why do we have these? But I understand that my story is just one story. And so I wanted to understand more of the constellation of stories. So I interviewed 10 different women. No, that is not representative of all of the stories of Native identity, but it certainly gave me more of a sense of the patterns that we see in terms of connection and disconnection, and how enrollment has impacted or shaped their views of identity, and belonging and all of these other things.
And what do you hope readers, Native, non-Native, what their takeaway is after reading a book like this?
I think that Native issues are often relegated to the past. They become things we learned about in history class. They're thought of as things that existed 200 years ago. Well, we're still here. Native people are still here. We're still grappling with problems and issues that have arisen because of rules written 200 years ago, right? Those things that happened 200 years, 100 years ago are still actively impacting our lives. And I think that's important for everyone to understand, Native or not Native. All of the ways that these federal policies have shaped the ways that we think of Native identity in particular.
And you said something recently that I really loved. You said you wrote this book because it was a book that you felt like you didn't have. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I sort of firmly believe that you write the book you needed.
Wow.
And this was the book I needed. I needed to understand that I wasn't the only one who walked around feeling like I wasn't Native enough, which was always a feeling I had growing up. I needed to understand that I wasn't the only person sort of grappling with these issues of identity and belonging and disconnection. And certainly those go beyond Native issues too. There are plenty of people in the world and in this country who think about those sorts of things. And so it was important for me to look at the historical reasons of why all of these things have come about, in some ways to sort of make myself feel a little bit less alone.
That's beautiful. And I know this is your first book and we're talking about this and that's so exciting, but what's next for you?
So currently through the Native Policy Lab, which I run at the University of Iowa, we're working on an Indian boarding school project, which has come into the news recently.
Yes, I've seen that.
And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to return the boarding school records to survivors and their tribes. So all across the country, there are over 200,000 Native students whose boarding school records exist inside the National Archives, and they've never seen this stuff. They include handwritten notes from their family members. They include drawings from art class, like all of those childhood things that you just take for granted as part of your childhood. A lot of times these boarding school survivors don't have any of that. And so right now, through a project we're calling Project Return, we are returning those artifacts and childhood mementos to the rightful owners.
This is so amazing. Thank you so much for being here and such a thoughtful book and conversation.
Thank you so much.
And just a reminder, of course, Carrie is holding an author event at the Elliott Bay Book Company tonight, Monday, October 28th at 7 p.m. So make sure you check that out.